What's up, everybody? We are back. Bloody History. Wait a minute. What show am I on? Oh, yeah. This is Corey Hughes' Bloody History. If you're wondering why I'm confused, it's because I have another show called Bloody History World War II. It's only available on Substack. And if you're not subscribing to that, you should be, because it's fucking awesome. So, yeah. We're going to go ahead and we're going to wrap up this ZRRIFLE committee conclusion file today. Pretty excited about this because I like this ZRRIFLE stuff. It's interesting to see how the CIA is either abject liars or the most incompetent people of all time. I think I know which it is. So, all right, here we go. Section 4. The failure in communication between agency officials in charge of the assassination operations and their superiors in the agency and in the administration was due to, A, the failure of subordinates to disclose the operations to their superiors, and B, the failure of superiors to give precise orders regarding the nature of permissible operations, and to make clear that assassination was precluded in the climate of violence engendered by the aggressive covert actions sanctioned by the administration. While we cannot find that officials responsible for the making policy decisions knew about or authorized the assassination attempts, with the possible exception of the Lumumba case, agency operatives, at least through the level of DDP, nevertheless perceived assassination to have been permissible. This failure in communication was inexcusable in light of the gravity of assassination. The committee finds that the failure of agency officials to inform their superiors was reprehensible, and that the reasons that they offered for having neglected to inform their superiors are unacceptable. The committee further finds that administration officials failed to be sufficiently precise in their directions to the agency, and that their attitude towards the possibility of assassination was ambiguous in the context of the violence of other activities that they did authorize. Well, here's the thing. Here's what's telling. Nobody got in trouble. Okay? You got motherfucking assassination attempts going on all over goddamn South America, and nobody got in trouble. Hello? Nobody got in trouble. All right. A, agency officials failed on several occasions to reveal the plots and to their superiors, or to do so with sufficient detail and clarity. Several of the cases considered in this report raise questions concerning whether officials of the CIA sufficiently informed their superiors in the agency or officials outside the agency about their activities. Castro. The failure of agency officials to inform their superiors of the assassination efforts against Castro is particularly troubling. Richard Bissell testified that he and Sheffield Edwards told Allen Dulles only circumlocuciously and only after the project had begun about the operation which used members of the underworld. Both Bissell and his successor as DDP, Richard Helms, testified that they never discussed the operation with McCone or any other officials outside the CIA. The two officials directly responsible for the operation, Edwards and William Harvey, testified that they never discussed the operation with McCone or any government official above the level of DDP. McCone testified that he was never consulted about the operation, and that Dulles never briefed him on its existence. On the basis of the testimony and documentary evidence before the committee, it is uncertain whether Dulles was ever made aware of the true nature of the underworld operation, and virtually certain that it continued into McCone's term without his or the administration's knowledge or approval. I don't know about that. On the occasions when Richard Bissell had the opportunity to inform his superiors about the assassination effort against Castro, he either failed to inform them or misled them. Bissell testified that he and Edwards told Dulles and Cabell about the assassination operation using underworld figures, but that they did so circumlocuciously, and that only after contact had been made with underworld and price had been offered for Castro's death. Bissell further testified that he never raised the issue of assassination with officials of either the Eisenhower or Kennedy administration. His reason was that since he was under Dulles in the chain of command, he would normally have no duty to discuss the matter with the president or other administration officials, and that he assumed that Dulles would have circumlocuciously spoken with the presidents Eisenhower and Kennedy about the operation. These reasons are insufficient. It was inexcusable to withhold such information from those responsible for formulating policy on the unverified assumption that they might have been circumlocutously informed by Dulles. But if you'll remember, we go back 2 or 3 episodes, we have Dick Bissell having a conversation with McGeorge Bundy about this, right? And then we discussed Bundy's testimony and back and forth about the two of them, and they didn't. They both decided, we thought it's all bullshit, right? They all knew. This is all fucking cover up. The failure to either inform those officials or to make certain that they had been informed by Dulles was particularly reprehensible in light of the fact that there were many occasions on which Bissell should have informed them, and his failure to do so was misleading. In the first weeks of the Kennedy administration, Bissell met with Bundy and discussed the development of an assassination capability within CIA executive action, but Bissell did not mention that an actual assassination attempt was underway. Bissell appeared before the Taylor-Kennedy Board of Inquiry, which was formed to report to the president on the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban situation, but testified that he did not inform the commission of the assassination operation. As chief of the CIA directorate concerned with clandestine operations in the Bay of Pigs, Bissell frequently met with officials in the Eisenhower and Kennedy administrations to discuss Cuban operations, and his advice was frequently sought. He did not tell them that the CIA had undertaken an effort to associate Castro and did not ask if they favored proceeding with the effort. He was present at the meeting with Dulles and President Kennedy, at which the new president was briefed on covert action in Cuba, but neither Dulles nor Bissell mentioned the assassination operation that was underway. We have an asterisk here. Even assuming that Bissell correctly perceived that Dulles understood the nature of the operation, it was inexcusable for Bissell not to have briefed Dulles in plain language. Further, even if one accepts Bissell's assumption that Dulles told the presidents, they would have been told too late because Bissell guessed they would have been told that the operation had been planned and was being attempted. Oh, let me make this really fucking clear. Dulles knew everything that was going on, period. All operations, all everything. The failures to make forthright disclosures to policymakers continued during the time that Richard Helms was DDP. Helms' failure to inform McCone about the underworld operation when it was reactivated under Harvey and poison pills were sent to Cuba was a grave error in judgment, and Helms' excuses are unpersuasive. In May of 1962, the Attorney General was told that the CIA's involvement in an assassination plot had terminated with the Bay of Pigs. Not only did Edwards, who had briefed the Attorney General, know that the operation had not been terminated, but Helms did not inform the Attorney General that the operation was still active when he learned that the Attorney General had been misled. Helms did not inform McCone of the plot until August of 1962, and did so then in a manner which indicated that the plot had been terminated before McCone became director. Helms' denial that Amlash had been involved in an assassination attempt in response to Secretary of State Rusk's inquiries was, as Helms testified, quote, not truthful. When Helms briefed President Johnson on the Castro plots, he apparently described the activities that had occurred during prior administrations, but did not describe the Amlash operation, which had continued until 1965. Helms also failed to inform the Warren Commission of the plots because of the precise question was not asked. Helms told the committee that he never raised the assassination operation with McCone or Kennedy administration officials because he had assumed that the project had been previously authorized and that the aggressive character of the Kennedy administration's program against the Castro regime made assassination permissible even in the absence of an express instruction. He added that he had never been convinced that the operation would succeed and that he would have told McCone about it if he had ever believed that it would, quote, go anyplace. Helms' reasons for not having told his superiors about the assassination effort are unacceptable. Indeed, many of them were reasons why he should have sought express authority. As Helms himself testified, assassination was of a high order of sensitivity. Administration policymakers, supported by intelligence estimates furnished by the agency, had emphasized on several occasions that successors to Castro might be worse than Castro himself. In addition, the special group augmented required that plans for covert actions against Cuba be submitted in detail for its approval. Although the administration was exerting intense pressure on the CIA to do something about Castro and the Castro regime, it was a serious error to have undertaken so drastic an operation without obtaining full and equivocal permission. William Harvey, the officer in charge of the CIA's attempt using underworld figures to assassinate Castro, testified that he never discussed the plot with McCone or officials of the Kennedy administration because he believed that it had been fully authorized by the previous director, because he was uncertain whether it had a chance of succeeding, and because he believed that it was Helms, not his duty, to inform higher authorities. Nonetheless, the committee believes that there were occasions on which it was incumbent on Harvey to have disclosed the assassination operation. As head of Task Force W, the branch of the CIA responsible for covert operations in Cuba, Harvey reported directly to General Lansdale and the Special Group Augmented. The Special Group Augmented had made known that covert operations in Cuba should be first approved by it, both by explicit instruction and by its practice that particular operations be submitted in nauseating detail. Yet Harvey did not inform either General Lansdale or the Special Group Augmented of the assassination operation, either when he was explicitly requested to report to McCone, General Taylor, and the Special Group and his activities in Miami in April of '62, or when the subject of assassination was raised in the August 1962 meeting and McCone voiced his disapproval. The committee finds that the reasons advanced for not having informed those responsible for formulating policy about assassination operations were inadequate, misleading, and inconsistent. Some officials viewed assassination as too important and sensitive to discuss with superiors, while others considered it not sufficiently important. Harvey testified that it was premature to tell McCone about the underworld operation in April of 1962 because it was not sufficiently advanced, but too late to tell him about it in August of 1962, since by that time he had decided to terminate it. On other occasions, officials thought disclosure was someone else's responsibility. Bissell said he thought it was up to Dulles. Harvey believed it was up to Helms, but Helms remarked that Harvey, quote, kept phase 2 pretty much in his back pocket. See? Just passing the buck. Passing the buck. Let me read this sentence again just to drive it home. On other occasions, officials thought disclosure was someone else's responsibility. Bissell said he thought it was up to Dulles. Harvey believed he thought it was up to Helms, but Helms remarked that Harvey kept phase 2 pretty much in his back pocket. Okay, you think this is this is so well organized ignorance that it has to be training. It's got to be coming down to training. This stuff has to be trained in a fucking class. The committee concludes that the failure clearly to inform policymakers of the assassination effort against Castro was grossly improper. The committee believes that it should be incumbent upon the DDP to report such a sensitive operation to his superior, the DCI, no matter how grave his doubts might be about the possible outcome of the operation. It follows that the DCI has the same duty to accurately inform his superiors. Trujillo. In the Trujillo case, there were several instances in which it appears that policymakers were not given sufficient information or were not informed in a timely fashion. At a meeting on December 29, 1960, Bissell presented a plan to the Special Group for supporting Dominican exile groups and local dissidents, and stated that the plan would not bring down the regime without, quote, some decisive stroke against Trujillo himself. At a meeting on January 12, 1961, the Special Group authorized the passage of, quote, limited supplies of small arms and other material to Dominican dissidents under certain conditions. At this time, the fact that the dissidents had been contemplating the assassination of Trujillo had been known in the State Department at the level of the Assistant Secretary of State for Inter-American Affairs and by senior officials of the CIA, including the DCI. Yet the memorandum supplied to Undersecretary Merchant, which was said to have been the basis upon which the Special Group agreed to the, quote, limited supply of small arms, did not mention assassination. To the contrary, it spoke of sabotage potential and stated that there would, quote, be no thought of toppling the government of any such minor measure as the supplying of small arms. On February 17, 1961, Richard Bissell sent a memorandum on the Dominican Republic to McGeorge Bundy. Bissell knew that the dissidents planned to assassinate Trujillo, but this memorandum did not mention assassination. It indicated that the dissidents' plan of action included arms for 300 men. Those involved agreed that support of this nature suggested a non-targeted parliamentary plan, not an assassination. The passage of the carbines was approved by CIA headquarters on March 31st, 1961. The State Department was apparently unaware of this passage for several weeks. The poaching of the machine guns was not disclosed outside of the CIA. The State Department official from whom the CIA sought permission to pass the machine guns stated that on, quote, cross-examination, the CIA official conceded that the purpose was an assassination. The CIA official then agreed the United States should have nothing to do with assassination plots anywhere, anytime, even though the previous day he and Bissell had signed a draft cable permitting the passage of the machine guns for use in connection with a planned assassination. Fuck! Schneider. We're on to General Schneider now. The issue here is not whether the objectives of the CIA were contrary to those of the administration. It is clear that the President Nixon desired to prevent Allende from assuming office, even if that required fomenting and supporting a coup in Chile. Nor did White House officials suggest the tactics employed, including as a first step to kidnapping General Schneider, would have been unacceptable as a matter of principle. Rather, the issue posed is whether White House officials were consulted and thus given an opportunity to weigh such matters as risk and likelihood of success and to apply policy-making judgments to particular tactics. The record indicates that up to October 15th, after October 15th, there is some doubt. The documentary record with respect to the disputed post-October 15th period gives rise to conflicting inferences. On the one hand, Karen Messinas' calendar shows the existence of at least one White House contact in the critical period prior to the kidnapping of General Schneider on October 22nd. However, the absence of any substantive memoranda in CIA files, when contrasted with several such memoranda describing contacts with the White House between September 15th and October 15th, may suggest a lack of significant communication on the part of the CIA as well as a lack of careful supervision on the part of the White House. The standards applied within the CIA itself suggest a view that action which the committee believes called for top-level policy discussion, and discussion was thought of as permissible without any further consultation. On the basis of the initial instruction to prevent Allende from assuming power, machine guns were sent to Chile and delivered to military figures there on the authority of junior CIA officers without consultation even with the CIA officer in charge of the program. We find no suggestion of bad faith in the action of the junior officers, but it necessarily establishes that there was no advance permission from outside the CIA for the passage of machine guns, and it also suggests an attitude within the CIA toward consultation which was unduly lax. Further, this case demonstrated the problems inherent in giving an agency a blank check to engage in covert operations without specifying which actions are and are not permissible, and without adequately supervising and monitoring these activities once begun. B. On occasion, administration officials gave vague instructions to subordinates and failed to make sufficiently clear that assassination should be excluded from consideration. While we cannot find that high administration officials expressly approved of the assassination attempts, we have noted that certain agency officials nevertheless perceived assassination to have been authorized. Although those officials were remiss in not seeking express authorization for their activities, their superiors were also at fault for giving vague instructions and for not explicitly ruling out assassination. No written order prohibiting assassination was issued until 1972, and that order was an internal CIA directive issued by Director Helms. Schneider. As explained above, there is no evidence that assassination was ever proposed as a method of carrying out the presidential order to prevent Allende from assuming office. The committee believes, however, that the granting of carte blanche authority to the CIA by the executive in this case may have contributed to the tragic and unintended death of General Schneider. This was also particularly due to impositing an impractical task to be accomplished within an unreasonably short time. Apart from the question of whether any intervention was justified under the circumstances of this case, the committee believes that the executive in any event should have defined the limits of permissible action. Lumumba. We are unable to make a finding that President Eisenhower intentionally authorized an assassination effort against Lumumba because of the lack of absolute certainty in the evidence. However, it appears that the strong language used in discussion at the special group and NSC, National Security Council, as reflected in minutes of the relevant meetings, led Dulles to believe that assassination was desired. The minutes contain language concerning the need to, quote, dispose of Lumumba and, quote, an extremely strong feeling about the necessity for straightforward action and a refusal to rule out any activity that might contribute to getting rid of Lumumba. Castro. The effort to assassinate Fidel Castro took place in an atmosphere of extreme pressure by Eisenhower and Kennedy administration officials to discredit and overthrow the Castro regime. Richard Helms recalled that, quote, I remember vividly that the pressure was very intense, and therefore when you go into the record, you find a lot of nutty schemes there, and those nutty schemes were born of the intensity of the pressure, and we were quite frustrated. Bissell recalled that, quote, during that entire period, the administration was extremely sensitive about the defeat that had been inflicted as they felt on the U.S. at the Bay of Pigs and were pursuing every possible means of getting rid of Castro. Another witness, Samuel Halpern, stated that sometime in the fall of 1961, Bissell was, quote, chewed out in the cabinet room by the White House by both the president and the attorney general for, as he put it, sitting on his ass and not doing anything about getting rid of Castro and the Castro regime, end quote. General Lansdale informed the agencies cooperating in Operation Mongoose that, quote, you're in a combat situation where we have been given full command. Secretary of Defense McNamara confirmed that, quote, we were hysterical about Castro at the time in the Bay of Pigs and thereafter. Many of the plans that were discussed and often approved contemplated violent action against Cuba. The operation, which resulted in the Bay of Pigs, was a major paramilitary onslaught that had the approval of the highest government officials, including two presidents. Thereafter, Attorney General Kennedy vehemently exhorted the special group, augmented that a solution to the Cuban problem today carried top priority. No time, money, effort, or manpower is to be spared. Subsequently, Operation Mongoose involved propaganda and sabotage operations aimed towards spurring a revolt of the Cuban people against Castro. Measures that were considered by the top policymakers included incapacitating sugar workers during harvest season by the use of chemicals, blowing up bridges in production plants, sabotaging merchandise in third countries, even those allied with the United States prior to its delivery to Cuba, and arming insurgents on the island. Programs undertaken at the urging of the administration included intensive efforts to recruit and arm dissidents within Cuba and raids on plants, mines, and harbors. Discussions at the special group and NSC meetings might well have contributed to the perception of some CIA officials that assassination was a permissible tool in the effort to overthrow the Castro regime. At a special group meeting in November 1960, Under Secretary Merchant inquired whether any planning had been undertaken for, quote, direct positive action against Che Guevara, Raul, and Fidel Castro. Cabell replied that such a capability did not exist, but might well have left the meeting with the impression that the assassination was not out of bounds. One phase of Landale's plans, which was submitted to the special group in January of 1962, aimed at inducing open revolt and overthrow of the communist regime, and included in the final phase an attack on the cadre of the regime, including key leaders. The proposal stated that this should be a special target operation. Gangster elements might provide the best recruitment potential against police. Several minutes from special group meetings contain language such as possible removal of Castro from the Cuban scene. Although Lansdale's proposal was shelved, the type of aggressive action contemplated was not ruled out. On several occasions, the subject of assassination was discussed in the presence of senior administration officials. While those officials never consented to actual assassination efforts, they also failed to indicate that assassination was impermissible as a matter of principle. In early 1961, McGeorge Bundy was informed of a CIA project described as the development of a capability to assassinate. Bundy raised no objection and, according to Bissell, may have been more affirmative. Although Bissell stated that he did not infer authorization from Bundy's remarks for the underworld plot against Castro that was then underway, the fact that he believed that the development of an assassination capability had been approved by the White House, which he subsequently told Harvey, may well have contributed to the general perception that the assassination was not prohibited. Documents indicate that in May of '62, Attorney General Kennedy was told that the CIA had sought to assassinate Castro prior to the Bay of Pigs. According to the CIA officials present at the briefing, the Attorney General indicated his displeasure about the lack of consultation on the impropriety of the attempt itself. There is no evidence that the Attorney General told the CIA that it must not engage in assassination plots. At a meeting of the special group augmented in August of 1962, well after the assassination efforts were underway, Robert McNamara is said to have raised the question of whether the assassination of Cuban leaders should be explored, and General Lansdale issued an action memorandum assigning the CIA the task of preparing contingency plans for the assassination of Cuban leaders. While McCone testified that he had immediately made it clear that assassination was not to be discussed or condoned, Harvey's testimony and documents, which he wrote after the event, indicate that Harvey may have been confused over whether McCone had objected to the use of assassination or whether he was only concerned that the subject not be put in writing. In any event, McCone went no further. He issued no general order banning consideration of assassination within the agency. We have a lengthy asterisk here. Documents show that Attorney General Robert Kennedy learned in May of 1961 that the CIA had used underworld figures in an operation against Cuba. The documentary record further reflects that the Attorney General was not told that the operation had involved assassination efforts until May of 62, and that the operation was then described to him as having been terminated in May of 61. There's no evidence that the Attorney General suspected the true nature of the operation until that briefing, or that he learned that it had not in fact been terminated. While it is curious that the Attorney General would not have inquired further into the nature of the operation when he discovered that Sam Giancana had been involved in it, there is no evidence that he did. All right. Next page. One of the programs forwarded to General Lansdale by the Defense Department in the Mongoose program was entitled Operation Bounty, and envisioned dropping leaflets in Cuba offering rewards for the assassination of government leaders. Although the plan was vetoed by Lansdale, it indicates that the persons in agencies other than CIA perceived the assassination might be permissible. While the ambivalence of administration officials does not excuse the misleading conduct by agency officials or justify their failure to seek explicit permission, it displayed an insufficient concern about assassination, which may have contributed to the perception that assassination was an acceptable tactic in accomplishing the government's general objectives. With the exception of the tight guidelines issued by the special group augmented concerning Operation Mongoose, precise limitations were never imposed on the CIA requiring prior permission for the details of other proposed covert operations against Cuba. No general policy banning assassination was promulgated until Helm's intra-agency order in 1972. In light of the number of times in which the subject of assassination arose, administration officials were remiss in not explicitly forbidding such activity. Okay, so let me fucking put that last sentence into other words, okay? Considering that they were so adamantly against fucking assassination, you would think that over the decade that they were discussing it, they would have at least one time said, don't do it. Ha! The committee notes that many of the occasions on which the CIA officials should have informed their superiors of assassination efforts but failed to do so or did so in a misleading manner were also occasions on which administration officials paradoxically may have reinforced the perception that assassination was permissible. For example, when Bissell spoke with Bundy about an executive action capability, Bissell failed to indicate that an actual assassination operation was underway, but Bundy failed to rule out assassination as a tactic. In May of 1962, the Attorney General was misleadingly told about the effort to assassinate Castro prior to the Bay of Pigs, but not about the operation that was going on. The Attorney General, however, did not state that assassination was improper. When a senior administration official raised the question of whether assassination should be explored at a special group meeting, the assassination operation should have been revealed, but a firm written order against engaging in an assassination should also have been issued by McCone if, as he testified, if he had exhibited strong aversion to assassination. 6. Practices current at the time in which assassination plots occurred were revealed by the record to create the risk of confusion, rashness, and irresponsibility in the very areas where clarity and sober judgment was most necessary. Various witnesses described elements of the system within which the assassination plots were conceived. The committee is disturbed by the custom that permitted the most sensitive matters to be presented to the highest levels of government with the least clarity. We find this disturbing and view the following concepts as particularly dangerous. 1. The extension of the doctrine of plausible denial beyond its intended purpose of hiding the involvement of the United States from other countries to an effort to shield higher officials from knowledge and hence responsibility for certain operations. The use of circumlocution or euphemism to describe serious matters such as assassination when precise meanings ought to be made clear. 3. The theory that general approval of broad covert action programs is sufficient to justify specific actions such as assassination or the passage of weapons. 4. The theory that authority granted or assumed to be granted by one director or one administration could be presumed to continue without the necessity for reaffirming the authority with successor officials. 5. The creation of capabilities without careful review and authorization by policymakers and the risk that such capabilities might be used without further authorization. A. The danger inherent in overextending the doctrine of plausible denial. The original concept of plausible denial envisioned implementing covert actions in a manner calculated to conceal American involvement if the actions were exposed. The doctrine was at times a delusion and at times a snare. It was naive for policymakers to assume that sponsorship of actions as big as the Bay of Pigs invasion could be concealed. The committee's inquiry into assassination and the public disclosures which preceded it demonstrate that when the United States resorted to cloak and dagger tactics, its hand was ultimately exposed. In addition, the likelihood of reckless action is substantially increased when policymakers believe that their decisions will never be revealed. Whatever can be said in defense of the original purpose of plausible denial, a purpose which intends to conceal U.S. involvement from the outside world. The extension of the doctrine to the internal decision-making process of the government is absurd. Any theory which, as matter of doctrine, places elected officials on the periphery of the decision-making process is an invitation to error, an abdication of responsibility, and a perversion of democratic government. The dangers of using circumlocution and euphemism. According to Richard Bissell, the extension of plausible denial to internal decision-making required the use of circumlocution and euphemism in speaking with presidents and other senior officials. Explaining this concept only heightens its absurdity. Holy shit. Fuck. Oh, fucking Jesus Christ. I hope you understand why I'm fucking laughing my ass off. This is hilarious. Let me read this again. According to Richard Bissell, the extension of plausible denial to internal decision-making required the use of circumlocution and euphemism in speaking with presidents and other senior officials. Explaining this concept only heightens its absurdity. That's fucking good. On the one hand, it assumes that senior officials should be shielded from the truth to enable them to deny knowledge if the truth comes out. On the other hand, the concept assumes that senior officials must be told enough by way of double talk to grasp the subject. As a consequence, the theory fails to accomplish its objective and only increases the risk of misunderstanding. Subordinate officials should describe their proposals in clear, concise, and brutally frank language. Busy superiors are entitled to and should demand no less. Oh, this might be the fucking greatest paragraph ever written in the history of intelligence. Oh my God, I almost want that on my tombstone. Euphemism may actually have been preferred not because of plausible denial, but because of the persons involved could not bring themselves to state in plain language what they intended to do, and may have in some instances assumed rightly or wrongly that the listening superiors did not want the issue squarely placed before them. Assassinate, murder, and kill are words many people do not want to speak or hear. They describe acts which should not even be proposed, let alone plotted. Failing to call dirty business by its rightful name may have increased the risk of dirty business being done. The danger of generalized instructions, permitting specific acts to be taken on the basis of general approvals of broad strategies, e.g., keep Allende from assuming office and get rid of the Castro regime, blurs responsibility and accountability. Worse still, it increases the danger that subordinates may take steps which would have been disapproved if the policymakers had been informed. A further danger is that policymakers might intentionally use loose general instructions to evade responsibility for embarrassing activities. In either event, we find that the gap between general policy objectives and the specific actions undertaken to achieve them was far too wide. It is important that policymakers review the manner in which their directives are implemented, particularly when the activities are sensitive, secret, and immune from public scrutiny. The danger of, quote, floating authorization. One justification advanced by Richard Helms and William Harvey for not informing John McCone about the use of underworld figures to assassinate Fidel Castro was their assertion that the project had already been approved by McCone's predecessor, Allen Dulles. And further, that further authorization was unnecessary, at least until the operation had reached a more advanced stage. Similarly, most of the action taken in the Trujillo case during the early months of the Kennedy administration were authorized by the special group on January 2nd, 1961. At the end of the Eisenhower administration, The idea that authority might continue from one administration or director to the next and that there is no duty to reaffirm authority with successors inhibits responsible decision-making. A circumstance may change or judgments differ. New officials should be given the opportunity to review significant programs. The problem connected with creating new covert capabilities. The development of a new capability raises numerous problems. Having a capability to engage in certain covert activities increases the probability that it will occur, since the capability represents a tool that is available for use. There is the further danger that authorizing a capability may be misunderstood as authorizing its use without need for obtaining explicit authorization. Of course, an assassination capability should never have been created in the first place. Recommendations. During our long investigation of assassination, a number of vital issues came into sharp focus. Above all stood the question of assassination. Our recommendations on other issues should wait the completion of our continuing investigations in our final report, but we need more information to convince us that a flat ban against assassination should be written into law. We condemn assassination and reject it as an instrument of American policy. Surprisingly, at present, there is no statute making it a crime to assassinate a foreign official outside the United States. Hence, for the reasons set forth below, the committee recommends the prompt enactment of a statute making it a federal crime to commit or attempt an assassination or to conspire to do so. A. General agreement that the United States must not engage in assassination. Our view that the assassination has no place in America's arsenal is shared by the administration. President Ford, in the same statement in which he asks this committee to deal with the assassination issue, stated, quote, I am opposed to political assassination. This administration has not and will not use such means as instruments of national policy. Presidential Press Conference, June 9, 1975. The witnesses we examined uniformly condemned assassination. They denounced it as immoral, described it as impractical, and reminded us that as an open society, most of all runs the risk of the assassination of its own leaders. As President Kennedy was reported to have said, quote, we can't get into that kind of thing or we would all be targets. Goodwin, 7/18/75, page 4. The current CIA director and his two predecessors testified emphatically that assassination should be banned. Thus, Colby said, quote, with respect to assassination, my position is clear. I think it's just wrong, and I have said so and made it very clear to my subordinates. Colby's predecessor, Helms, although himself involved in an earlier plot, said he had concluded assassination should be ruled out for both moral and practical reasons. Quote, as a result of my experiences through the years when I became director, I had made up my mind that this option of killing foreign leaders was something that I did not want to happen on my watch. My reasons for this were these. There are not only moral reasons, but there are also some other rather practical reasons. It is almost impossible in a democracy to keep anything like that secret. Somebody would go on a congressman, like a senator. He might go to a newspaperman, whatever the case may be. It is just not a practical alternative, it seems to me, in our society. Then there is another consideration. If you are going to try this kind of means to remove a foreign leader, then who is going to take his place running that country? And you are essentially better off as a matter of practice when it is over than you were before. And I can give you, I think, a very solid example of this, which happened in Vietnam and when President Diem was eliminated from the scene. We then had a revolving door of prime ministers after that for quite some period of time, but during which the Vietnamese government, at a time in its history when it should have been strong, was nothing but a caretaker government. In other words, the whole exercise turned out to be the disadvantage of the United States. There's no sense in my sitting here with all the experience I have had and not sharing with the committee my feelings this day. It isn't because I've lost my cool or because I've lost my guts. It's simply because I don't think it's a viable option in the United States of America these days. Chairman Church then said, doesn't it also follow, Mr. Helms, I agree with you, what you have said fully, but doesn't it also follow that on the practical side, apart from the moral side, that since these secrets are bound to come, when they do, they are very grave political damage to the United States in the world at large. I don't know to what extent the Russians involved themselves in political assassinations, but under their system, they at least have a better prospect of keeping it concealed. Since we do like a free society, and since these secrets are going to come out in due course, the revelation will then do serious injury to the good name and reputation of the United States. Would you agree with that? Mr. Helms then said, yes, I would. The chairman says, and finally, if I were to reserve with ourselves the prerogative to assassinate foreign leaders, we may invite reciprocal action from foreign governments who assume that if it's our prerogative to do so, then it's their prerogative as well. And that is another danger that we at least invite with this kind of action. Wouldn't you agree? Yes, sir. Similarly, John McCone said he was opposed to assassinations because, quote, I didn't think it was proper from the standpoint of the U.S. government and the Central Intelligence Agency. It's from his testimony on June 6, 75. B. CIA directives banning assassination. In 1972 and 73, Helms and then Colby issued internal CIA orders banning assassination. In his order, Helms said, quote, it has recently again been alleged in the press that CIA engaged in assassination. As you are all well aware, this is not the case. The agency policy has long been clear on the issue. To underline it, however, I direct that no such activity or operation be undertaken, assisted, or suggested by any of our personnel. Memorandum, Helms to Deputy Directors 3672. Colby, in one of a series of orders in August of 73 arising out of the agency's own review of prior, quote, questionable activity, issued an order which stated, quote, CIA will not engage in assassination nor induce, assist, or suggest others that assassinate be employed. Memorandum Colby to Deputy Directors 829-73. C. The need for a statute. Commendable and welcome as they are, these CIA directives are not sufficient. Administrations change, CIA directors change, and someday in the future, what was tried in the past may once again become a temptation. Assassination plots did happen. It would be irresponsible for us to not do all we can to prevent their happening again. Laws express our society's values. They deter those who might be tempted and stiffen the will of those who want to resist. The statute we recommended, which is printed as an appendix to this report, makes it a criminal offense for persons subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, 1, to conspire within or outside the United States to assassinate a foreign official, 2, to attempt to assassinate a foreign official, or 3, assassinate a foreign official. President law makes it a crime to kill or to conspire to kill a foreign official guessed while such a person is in the United States. However, there is no law which makes it a crime to assassinate or conspire to attempt to assassinate a foreign official while such official is outside of the United States. Our proposed statute is thus designed to close this gap in the law. Subsection A of the proposed statute would punish conspiracies formed within the United States. Subsection B punishes conspiracies outside of the United States, and subsection B is necessary to eliminate the loophole, which would otherwise permit persons to simply leave the United States and conspire abroad. Subsections C and D, respectively, make it an offense to attempt to kill or to kill a foreign official outside the United States. Subsections A through D specifically apply to any officer or employee of the United States. To make clear that the statute punishes conduct by U.S. government personnel as well as conduct by private citizens having no relation to the U.S. government. In addition, subsection A, dealing with conspiracies within the United States, applies to, quote, any other person, whether or not a United States citizen, non-citizen, who conspire within the United States to assassinate a foreign official, clearly come within the jurisdiction of U.S. law. Subsections B through D, which deal with conduct outside the U.S., apply to U.S. citizens and to officers or employees of the United States, whether or not they are citizens. Criminal liability for conduct outside the U.S. of persons who are not U.S. citizens or who do hold a position as an officer or employee of the U.S. are matters for the law of the place where such conduct takes place. In the course of our hearings, some witnesses, while strongly condemning assassination, asked whether, as a matter of theory, assassination should absolutely be ruled out in a time of truly unusual national emergency. Adolf Hitler was cited as an example. Of course, the cases with which we were concerned were not of that character. In a grave emergency, the president has limited power to act not in violation of the law, but in accordance with his own responsibilities under the Constitution to defend the nation. As the Supreme Court has declared, the Constitution, quote, is not a suicide pact. Kennedy versus Mendoza-Martinez. Abraham Lincoln, in an unprecedented emergency, claimed unprecedented power based on the need to preserve the nation. Quote, my oath to preserve the Constitution to the best of my ability imposed upon me the duty of preserving by every indispensable means that government, that nation of which that Constitution was the organic law. Was it possible to lose the nation and yet preserve the Constitution? By general law, life and limb, it must be protected, yet often a limb must be amputated to save a life. But a life is never wisely given to save a limb. I felt that measures otherwise unconstitutional might become lawful by becoming indispensable to the preservation of the Constitution through the preservation of the nation. It's from the Complete Works of Abraham Lincoln, Volume 10, page 65 and 66. Of course, whatever the extent of the president's own constitutional powers. It is a fundamental principle of our constitutional system that these powers are checked and limited by the Congress, including the Congress's power of impeachment. As a necessary corollary, any action taken by a president pursuant to his limited inherent powers in an apparent conflict with the law must be disclosed to the Congress. Only then may the Congress judge whether the action truly represented in Lincoln's phrase an indispensable necessity to the life of the nation. As Lincoln explained in submitting his extraordinary actions to the Congress for ratification, quote, in full view of his great responsibility, he has so far done what he has deemed his duty. You will now, according to your own judgment, perform yours. Abraham Lincoln, Message to Congress in Special Session, July 4th, 1861. Epilogue. We do not believe that the acts which we have examined represent the real American character. They do not reflect the ideals which have given the people of this country and of the world hope for a better, fuller, fairer life. We regard the assassination plots as aberrations. We must not adopt the tactics of the enemy. Means are as important as ends. Crisis makes it tempting to ignore the wise restraints that make men free, but each time we do so, each time the means we use are wrong, our inner strength, the strength which makes us free, is lessened. Despite our distaste for what we have seen, we have great faith in this country. This story is sad, but this country has the strength to hear it and to learn from it. We must remain a people who confront our mistakes and resolve not to repeat them. If we do not, we will decline, but if we do, our future will be worthy of the best of our past. That, ladies and gentlemen, was the Church Committee's 1978 review of the ZR Rifle program. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow with more.